Madam President, the Senate in a quorum call.
We are.
I would ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Madam President, I'm pleased that the Senate is finally debating S1 after 3 inexplicable Democrat attempts to filibuster the bill. This package of Middle East policy bills, all of which have bipartisan support, address a number of key issues. For starters, this legislation will further strengthen our relationship with our closest ally in the Middle East, Israel. It authorizes 10 years of military support funding to Israel, and it reaffirms the United States' commitment to ensuring that Israel has better weapons and equipment than its enemies. It will also foster increased technological cooperation between Israel and the United States to support the security of both of our countries. The legislation also strengthens our relationship with another close ally of ours in the Middle East, the Kingdom of Jordan. A Senate Intelligence Committee hearing on Tuesday was a timely reminder of the importance of investing in our alliances. As senior intelligence officials testified, China and Russia are becoming increasingly aggressive in seeking to increase their influence, not just in their own regions, but in other parts of the world. Russia's support of the Syrian regime is a prime example. Now more than ever, it is vital that we maintain close relationships with our allies. The legislation before us today also contains the Caesar Syria Civilian Protection Act. This legislation will help hold accountable individuals who have supported the atrocities of the Assad regime. And it directs the Treasury Department to investigate whether the Central Bank of Syria launders money for the Syrian government. Madam President, the conflict in Syria has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and driven literally millions of Syrians from their country. While the United States cannot solve every conflict around the world, it is vital that we make it very clear that the United States will not tolerate those who have contributed to the brutality of Bashar al-Assad's government. Finally, the legislation that we're considering today will protect the right of state and local governments to decline to do business with entities that have chosen to boycott Israel. As I said, all of the bills in the legislation before us today have bipartisan support, and I hope the Senate will pass this legislation with a strong bipartisan majority. Madam President, I'd also like to take a few words just to talk about an amendment that the leader has proposed. As I noted, this week our intelligence community leaders gave a frank assessment of the threats that we face to our national security and to our interests, from ISIS and al-Qaeda to the danger posed by a growing alignment between Russia and China to Iran's destabilizing activities in the Middle East. As intelligence officials made clear, the U.S. faces numerous persistent threats, and we should be wary of letting our guard down or becoming complacent about our strength. For that reason, I would like to state my support for Leader McConnell's amendment to express the sense of the Senate that we should be cautious about any premature withdrawal of our troops from Syria and Afghanistan. We don't have to look back very far for a reminder that prematurely withdrawing our troops can create a power vacuum that terrorists and others will step in to fill. Our too hasty withdrawal from Iraq on a timeline that we announced to our enemies created the circumstances that allowed for the rise of ISIS. We need to be wary about allowing something like that to happen again. And terrorist groups are not the only entities that we have to worry about. Adversaries like Russia and Iran are already trying to flex their power in the Middle East and would be more than happy to take advantage of an early U.S. withdrawal to strengthen their foothold in the region. While I understand and respect President Trump's desire to bring our troops home and to end these protracted wars, we must do so in a way that ensures enduring stability and protects our interests and those of our allies. The Leader's Amendment is an important reminder of the need for caution and reflection as we consider troop withdrawals. And it would reassure our allies that the United States does not intend to abruptly leave them in the midst of the battle. I hope all my colleagues will support the Leader's Amendment when we vote on it later this afternoon. Madam President, before I close, I'd like to mention the commissioning of the Navy's newest Virginia-class attack submarine, the USS South Dakota. which will occur this Saturday, February 2nd, 2019, in Groton, Connecticut. Designated SSN 790, the USS South Dakota will be the 17th submarine of her class, pushing the envelope of U.S. maritime technology and undersea dominance. We are proud that the state of South Dakota will once again be represented in the fleet by this engineering marvel, which will project America's strength and protect our national interests throughout the maritime domain and beyond. In March of 2012, I led the South Dakota delegation, which then included Senator Tim Johnson and Congresswoman Kristi Noem, in writing Secretary of the Navy Mabus to request that the Navy name its next attack submarine the USS South Dakota. I join them and all South Dakotans in saying that we are excited to see this honor come to fruition. The South Dakota will build off the legacy of her forebears, a Pennsylvania-class armored cruiser that served as a troop escort in World War I, and a battleship that was one of the most decorated battleships in World War II. The battleship South Dakota was a proud representative of the 68,000 South Dakotans who answered their country's call to serve in the war, earning 13 battle stars in the Pacific Theater. The South Dakota led with her 9 16-inch guns in the battles of the Santa Cruz Islands and Guadalcanal, earning a reputation as a fighting machine by defending U.S. aircraft carriers and disabling the enemies. In her second Pacific tour, the South Dakota supported Marine landings on the Marshall Islands with shore bombardments before joining the Battle of the Philippine Sea and fighting through a bomb hit to defend our fast carriers. As information on U.S. military action was limited at the time, she was often referred to as Battleship X, and Old Nameless. The submarine South Dakota will continue this distinguished tradition of service, and as is the nature of the submarine force, the accomplishments of this new boat and her crew may be even more secretive than those of her battleship predecessor. In fact, it could be decades until we can fully appreciate all the South Dakota might do in her 30-plus year service life. We may very well read about her exploits in a sequel to Blind Man's Bluff, the daring account of early U.S. submarine espionage and power projection. Because of the nature of their work, Madam President, the so-called silent service is often an undersung hero of the U.S. military. I've certainly never seen a submarine at an air show or coming down Main Street in a parade. The nature of the sub-force's mission is as secretive as it is high stakes. But at any given moment, the U.S. submarine force is patrolling the depths of the ocean and monitoring littoral waters for threats against our nation and our allies. The South Dakota will project power at sea and ashore with her payload of torpedoes and Tomahawk cruise missiles, which can be delivered without warning. Undetected, she will carry out the 7 core competencies of the submarine force: anti-submarine warfare, anti-surface warfare, delivery of special operations forces, strike warfare, irregular warfare, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and mine warfare, all while keeping adversaries on their toes. And Madam President, while Saturday will be a time for our Navy and the country to celebrate this milestone, the South Dakota won't just be talked about here at home. Around the world, our adversaries are taking note, as this submarine will further strengthen our global presence and ability to protect the interests of the U.S. and our allies. Our adversaries are already undertaking significant efforts to challenge U.S. military capabilities and international order. While they can try to copy our designs, mimic our operational concepts, or even try to replicate the way we train, one thing they will never be able to do is to imitate our people. The commissioning crew has proven its aptitude and professionalism in the months leading up to this point. The men and women of our submarine force, like those serving in the ranks across the Department of Defense, are the root of America's military strength. As Americans, we are grateful for all who have answered the call to serve and the families that support them, especially those that endure months apart during long deployments. The life of a submariner is not easy, nor is it easy for their loved ones. We thank them for their sacrifice. The South Dakota's complement of 135 talented officers and sailors will put its population in line with that of South Dakota towns like Isabel, Pierpont, and Java. And like South Dakota's rural towns, the USS South Dakota will be a tight-knit community of its own, albeit one uniquely confined to a submerged vessel just over a football field long with a nuclear reactor. Madam President, the indigenous inhabitants and early pioneer settlers of the state of South Dakota instilled a resourceful and resilient ethic in the culture of our state that continues to this day. This was driven by the remote, austere, and often unforgiving conditions on the Great Plains. I am confident that such hardiness will be replicated in each officer and crew member of the South Dakota as they live up to the boat's motto, which means, under the sea, we rule. And so, Madam President, as boat sponsor Deanie Dempsey brings the boat to life on Saturday, we thank the officers and crew of the South Dakota for their dedicated service to our country. May God bless the USS South Dakota and keep watch over her as she patrols the seas. Madam President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.